I lead the local delivery team at OPSS. Before we get started, can I do the virtual housekeeping that I'm sure we're all used to by now? But when you're not speaking, please can you turn your camera off and mute your microphone? We will be recording the session to share with delegates this afternoon, so please keep this in mind when you're posting things in the chat. If throughout the session your connection fails, you can dial back into the meeting, and the dial-in details are in the meeting options tab at the top of the screen. So if you think that might happen to you, perhaps make a note of those dial-in details now. And throughout the session, please do use the chat function for any thoughts or questions, and we'll endeavour to respond to these at the end of the session. Okay. So the event this year is officially called Working Together for the Future. And when we agreed on the title many months ago, we didn't actually appreciate how appropriate it would be. The pandemic has enhanced the need for greater collaboration, and we've witnessed local regulators at the heart of that. We've seen you working together in localities, across local authority boundaries and with the police. We've seen you working together with local businesses to find solutions to them becoming COVID secure, and also working together with government to inform policy and to provide us with a bit of a reality check about what it's like out there. However, in the team, we started referring to the week as the Week of Wonder, and that's the name that has stuck and you might have heard us referring to, and I think that's the Twitter handle for this week as well. And I'm sure that the sessions will hopefully live up to that billing. For those of you who have attended our shared learning days before in London, you'll know that there's always been a feel-good factor generated in the room. That's going to be a bit more challenging via video this week, but once again, we have got some fantastic sessions lined up for you. I think there's 23 sessions in all, and that's something that we certainly couldn't have done in a day in London. As always, the aim of the event is to share good practice, reflect on what's being achieved, provoke some new ideas, and provide you with some time away from the day job to think about things differently. This is our 8th annual event and is our most ambitious yet. We have a fantastic selection of speakers and a varied agenda. In your delegate packs, you should have an agenda. If you'd like to sign up for any more sessions, then please email the local delivery team, and I think we're going to put the email address in the chat for you there. So without further ado, let's get things started. In this first session today, we're joined by our Chief Executive, Graham Russell, to talk about post-COVID working. But to start the session, I'd first like to play you a video from our Minister, Paul Scully, who's the Minister for Small Business, Consumers and Labour Markets. If we could play the video, please. Okay, we don't seem to have any sound for the video. Perhaps we'll work on that in the background, and we'll play the video perhaps at the end.
Regulators this afternoon.
Come on.
The sudden and far-reaching impact of COVID-19.
No. Okay, we're going to restart the video and again.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be able to have the opportunity to say a few words to you today. My ministerial responsibilities include small businesses, consumers and regulation, and I welcome the opportunity to recognise the hard work of local regulators this afternoon. the sudden and far-reaching impact of COVID-19 pandemic has in some way affected everyone.
I think we'll leave the video. We seem to have some connection problems with the video, so we don't have these problems when we're in London, but we'll leave that at the moment. I think if we could turn the video off, and we'll come back to that at the end of the session. So I'll now introduce Graham Russell, our Chief Executive, and Graham's going to talk to us about post-COVID working. So hopefully, Graham, we can bring you up and get your slides up too.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thanks to the whole team for putting this on today, and thank you to everybody who has joined this call this morning. I really appreciate it. It's great to be able to talk to you all, and thank you for all the hard work that you've been doing over recent months. I think that video was just a little test really to see who was actually awake and quick to put something in the chat, so well done to everyone who was responding to that, and do please use the chat function. I'm hoping that we'll get some good questions and discussion, and I don't really want to talk for too long. I'd rather sort of listen to what you've got to say, but it is, as Catherine said, a new way of working for all of us. I'm sure, like me, you are heartened in a small part of your dark soul to see the Prime Minister yesterday lose his vocal connection to the House of Commons and have to be replaced by someone who's trying to answer questions. And it just reminded me of some of the challenges that we all face in working in these new ways at the moment. I remember the first all staff session I did back in March when we'd all gotten to working from home, and I'm not a great worker from home myself, but I'd set myself up here and at home, and I'd got my laptop ready and I was ready to do this meeting, and I think I was about 30 seconds in when my Wi-Fi connection broke, and I had to work out how you're supposed to connect on by phone and do all those things that we're now getting used to. So well done for getting to this point, and I think well done for recognising that learning from each other, listening to each other, and thinking more creatively about how we do our day jobs hasn't stopped just because we don't see each other. If anything, it's become more things have become possible, but we do have to work a little bit harder to do that. So well done to all of you that have joined this morning, and welcome. It's great to have you with us. What the Minister probably would have said in some ways has a similar thing to what I want to say, which is to recognise the work that local authority regulators have been doing in recent months, and also to point the way forward a little bit, and maybe help set the agenda for some of your conversations this week. The team with Catherine have set up a really good programme for this week, and there's some great sessions, and I hope you really enjoy them. You won't be able to go to all of them because some of them run in parallel, but I hope that you will be able to enjoy the ones you do get to and get a lot from that, both from the presenters and also from the conversations. It's been an incredible time, and I think it's good to reflect on that sometimes and sit back and say, well, what have we learnt from being part of all this? So I think I've got some slides which are going to guide me through, and we can perhaps put those up if someone's able to do that, and go on to those if we can. And we should be able to see a few things and work through a few things. Essentially, what I want to do is three things, really. First of all, just reflect a little bit on what local authority regulators have been doing. Some of you will know more of that than others. Some of you will know a lot about the things you've been doing, but maybe not so much about what other people are doing. I don't think anybody knows all of that, and the last one on the list there is deliberately quite broad. I don't know, Catherine, whether we're succeeding in getting the slides up. Hopefully somebody's doing that, but if no one's doing that, perhaps you can let me know and I can share them from here. But there are inevitably things that we know and things that we don't know. Here we are. There's some slides coming up now. So there, I think it's Kadeja's doing those for me. Thank you very much. So can we go straight on to the next slide, because that's me. My name is Graham Russell and I'm the Chief Executive of the office. So what have local authorities been doing in the last months? And as I say, some of you will know some of these things very, very well, much better than me, and others will know less about them. The top one there is about enforcing business restrictions and supporting business. And when we first moved into what was effectively the lockdown back in March, it's one thing to say these businesses will open, these businesses will close, you can do this, you can't do that, but who was going to enforce that? And it was very instructive to me that government moved very quickly to assume that those things would be enforced locally by local authority officers, trade standards, environmental health, licensing, different arrangements in different authorities, but absolutely from that core. And I think that does reflect the very, very strong brand recognition and brand awareness that politicians locally and nationally have around regulators and the expectation they have of the great work that you do. And of course, it was very tricky to do that when we didn't really have clear regulations, clear guidance, there wasn't effective monitoring in place, there wasn't backup arrangements, all the things that we would normally have around our regulatory environments. And there was a lot of creative work done by local authority regulators to establish that, and also of course a lot of work done by businesses who had very, very high compliance expectations, and also consumers who expected the same as well. We did see some challenges, you saw some challenges, and we worked through those. Some of those were quite difficult, some of them got into the national press, but I think what we saw was that the vast majority of businesses wanted to work with local regulators, and local regulators were keen to ensure that their locality was safe and protected. And so that has developed over the months, from really being about closures to then about safe opening, and then moving on through the various tier systems that we've worked through to the current situation, and whatever comes next, as you probably heard about yesterday, and then what comes after that as we move hopefully into calmer waters with the vaccine through the spring. And there will continue to be those expectations. I think what I've seen there is, first of all, really, really good frontline working, really good coordination, really good approach to working with businesses and protecting people. But also, I think a helpful raising of the profile of what local authority regulators can do. In part, that's been about the quality of the work itself. In part, it's been about the can-do attitude people have taken. Also, I think the way that people have responded to the data capture that we've done on behalf of the Cabinet Office has enabled, right at the heart of government, a picture to be seen of the capacity of frontline officers to move directly into active work and active resolution of issues. So I think there's been lots and lots of good things there. And I'm sure that the same stories are being told locally as we're telling nationally about the work that you're doing. And I'm sure you're taking opportunities to put those things before elected members and emphasise the good work that you're doing. And then alongside that, and this is particular to OPSS's work as a product safety regulator, we, and I guess in trading standards, but also in other parts of local authorities, local authority purchasing and resilience forums, as you see there, have been focusing very heavily on the adequacy of PPE supplies, which of course has been a major story in the news, but also focusing on ensuring that those supplies are safe. As many people have said, there is no point having PPE if it doesn't do the job. If anything, it creates a false expectation and a false confidence. So if you're going to supply personal protective equipment, you must ensure it does the job it was designed for. And in some sectors, we have seen tenfold increases in demand in those early months, and particularly in health and social care settings, but also some other settings of key workers around that. And where was those products going to come from? How do we ensure those products were adequate to do the job? How could we support British suppliers who wanted to move into that? And we've seen really two streams of work there. One is around what we call good PPE that is effective and able to do the job, and making sure that gets quickly and effectively to the place where it can be used. And officers worked at points of import, but also at some of the MOD and NHS hubs to assist supply and ensure that product was properly identified and properly supplied. But also at the same time dealing with those who would seek to use a difficult situation of crisis to facilitate their own profits rather than the safety of others, and sought to introduce unsafe, untested, uncertified, or even falsely certified products. And right at the front line there, we saw partnerships between local authority officers, border force, customs and excise, at first of all airports and then seaports, to ensure that stuff was identified, detained, and either supplied somewhere where it could be safely used, or got rid of if it couldn't be safely used at all. And that then extended not just to PPE, but also other products. Particularly, we saw quite a lot of work around hand sanitizers, particularly people producing alcohol realised they could change their production lines to produce hand sanitizers and other products. And it wasn't just in those areas, but other products as well. And more recently, we've seen things like ultraviolet pens, air cleansers, all sorts of things where claims are being made, but also other products that are being used in greater or demanded at least in greater quantity because of the pandemic and because of the work from home and changing how people are living. And that then went through into broader areas of unsafe and unfair business practices. Some examples there, all sorts of challenges through this period. You may have heard Michael O'Leary this morning talking about why Ryanair does or doesn't give refunds in certain situations. That continues to be a challenge in some of those sectors. And then beyond that, and you'll have many examples of this locally, I'm sure, a whole range of public health and protection functions, whether that was supporting the local authority stepping up its homelessness services, food packages, support for vulnerable people, information, signposting. And I'm sure if I asked you to all post one thing in the chat that you did, that you in the last 8 months that you weren't doing before that, we'd have a tremendous variety. And I think what all that points to is the great work that's been done locally, but also the way in which, to coin a phrase that we use perhaps too often, local regulators are the unsung heroes and expected to fill those gaps. There's an expectation that if a vaguely regulatory job needs doing at a local level and it's not really assigned to anyone else, then local regulators will be able to step in. And of course, to the credit of yourselves, that is something you do incredibly well. I know that it creates great challenges, particularly when the law isn't simple and clear, when the guidance isn't as thorough as you'd like it to be, when the processes aren't all in place. And my team have worked very, very hard over that period to meet you in those points of concern. Sometimes we've succeeded, sometimes it's been more difficult, sometimes tying together the multiple messages of government has proved quite challenging. But I think it does speak to the core importance of local regulators and local regulatory services. And I think this week is a good time, given that Catherine's calling it the Week of Wonder, just to I think pat yourselves on the back. You're probably all watching this on your own, so there's no one else to pat you on the back or give you a round of applause, but I think to pat yourselves on the back and recognise the significance of what you've been doing. But moving on from that, I just want to share 3 slides with you that perhaps point, at least from my perspective, to what some of the challenges might be in the future. And what do we learn, first of all, from COVID, but also from a couple of other things as we look forward. Some of you may have heard a longer version of this that I gave in another forum a month or so ago. My apologies, this is a shorter version, but it's got much of the same thinking in it. I hope it's useful to you. So next slide, please. First of all, what can we learn from COVID? And some of you will be far better soothsayers than I am. I did read a book a few years ago that said the impact of a virus and a highly transmittable virus could be devastating across the world in terms of economy, social impact, and so on. And apparently we read that this has been on the risk register of most countries for a number of years, but I don't think any of us really could claim to have seen how much impact this could have. When we first read the news back in January about this coronavirus and these markets in China, I don't think any of us would have accurately portrayed how the next 12 months was going to go. But what we've seen is that because of the interconnectedness of society, because of the way disease operates, because of various factors, really the way that we live our lives has been completely changed this year. And things that, certainly talking to national politicians, things that they found themselves doing in terms of, someone said over the weekend, about who you can live with, who you can sleep with, who you can talk to, and how you live your life, how you celebrate Christmas. All those things have been regulated by the UK government in a way that, frankly, has not been our experience. Some people have even said we've gone further than in warfare, in wars, in terms of what we've regulated and what we've controlled. And so we've seen that we've all had to adjust to different ways of living. And can we say, well, once we get the vaccine, and once we get this and once we get that, this will never happen again? Or is this one of a series of events that actually, because of the way we now live our lives, is likely to happen in the future? And I think all the experts are saying we should at least take that possibility seriously. And of course, COVID isn't the only thing that's devastated the way that we operate globally and nationally. It doesn't seem very long since we were recovering from the global economic crash of 2010s. But in the meantime, we've seen weather events, fire events in America. We've seen impact of storms and so on. We've seen the impact of migration and people's movements around the world. And now we see the impact of disease. And of course, this comes on the back of things like SARS and MERS, bird flu, and other issues that we've seen. So we see a whole pattern of accelerating events. What do regulators need to do? Is that any of that got anything to do with regulators, or is this just what we read in the papers? And I'm suggesting on that slide there 3 things, and I welcome your challenge as to whether you think these are 3 things that you need to be doing as a regulator, as a group of people, as a profession, or as an individual. First of all, I'm saying that we need to be adaptable. I've used on this slide the phrase the new normal, which I know some people have hated, but I've also seen that CIH are using it for a presentation they're doing this afternoon, so I think I might be in good company. But if this is the new normal, if there is a new normal emerging, or if there will be a new normal emerging at some point, how do we as regulators respond to that? And I think I've already pointed the way to that in terms of being adaptable, in terms of changing the way that we work. On-site inspections been much more difficult this year. I was talking to an international forum about this a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying, well, we've backed off all forms of regulation because we can't go and inspect. What else can we do? But I think we've seen in the UK that actually regulators have been very adaptable at how they can do things differently. And I think that adaptability will be a core requirement of all regulators, including local authority regulators, as we go forward. I don't profess to know what this new normal will be, but I do recognise that when you have a shock of this nature, you reset into a different place, and that different place will require you to adapt. There's a different version of that, though, which is also that regulators need to be agile. So adaptability is the ability to respond to a different circumstance and to form yourself differently, but agile is the ability to recognise that that isn't a one-off, that actually we're always constantly having to adjust to major and minor shocks. And if you just go, if you think about the things that we had on the previous slide, you'll see that there was a lot of responsibilities placed on local regulators to fulfil different roles according to COVID. But if it had been a different sort of crisis, then the roles that were required would be different. And agility, the ability to not only adapt, but adapt constantly and regularly and flexibly, I think is going to be a key characteristic for all regulators going forward. And I think now is the time to be thinking these thoughts rather than sort of wait and then we'll think about this. How do we make ourselves more agile and more adaptable? What sort of regulator do we need to be? What sort of structure do we need to have? What sort of culture do we need to have? Have we got the right relationships in the local authority, the fire authority, that the role that we can fulfill is recognised, but also that we're resourced to do that, not just in terms of financial resources, but also in terms of our positioning, our staff, our capability, our competencies, the training, the process that we have. And then a third consequence from COVID, at least, is that businesses need assurance. I've spoken about the challenges in those early days of business closure enforcement, where there were many challenges as what is the law, where is that clear guidance, where is that clear statement, where was the consultation, and all the things that we would normally regard as good policy making, enabling good delivery, weren't there. And so regulators had to fill that gap and provide businesses with assurance. If you do this, then you'll be okay in regard to that. And I'll come back to primary authority in a moment, but primary authority is a key way of providing that assurance. Even when we don't know everything, regulators can fulfill a role in enabling businesses to have assurance. And what became very clear as the weeks and months developed is that as society, we needed businesses to step up and fulfill all sorts of activities, whether it was supermarkets changing the way they operated, suppliers of personal protective equipment, transport operators, there was great need for change in their behaviour and regulators enabling them to have assurance that if they did this and did that, then they would be doing the right thing. It was absolutely critical to that. And that seems to me to be critical to all emergency responses that local authorities do, enabling those they regulate to have the assurance they can step forward and do the right thing. So those would be my 3 A's that flow in my assessment, and I'm very happy to hear whether you think they're the right things. From COVID, I've got 2 more to come, which are, I'll do a little bit more quickly, but just on COVID, they need to be adaptable, they need to be agile, and they need to provide assurance. The next slide is perhaps a little bit more from the context of OPSS as a product regulator. Can we have the next slide, please, Khadija? And talks about innovation. Now, on this slide, you may say, well, that's all about products, and I don't deal with products, and I don't know the extent to which innovation will be impacting on your sector. I suspect it's probably the case that it impacts on all sectors. So I suspect you could do your own version of this slide for your sector. But certainly, if you're involved, as we are, in the regulation of products, I think the way in which innovation is happening and the way in which, as government, nationally and locally, we need to encourage innovation to solve some of our future challenges, I think is probably something we should all think about. But quick summary of how we're seeing the world from a product safety perspective and a product regulation perspective, and 3 points really. First of all, the products are changing very, very quickly, and we've started a project called Fridge 2050, which is fairly prosaic. What will a fridge do and be capable of doing in 2050, and how do we start the journey towards that? And whether that's about enhanced safety, because the product can self-regulate itself and contact the owner, and if there's a recall, we already see with mobile phones that they can be very connected with that recall in a way that we don't see with domestic white goods. What would it mean if those things could happen? And what about the whole transport sector and cars? And we've seen that the date for the banning of petrol and diesel new cars has come forward, but what about driverless cars? What about the impact of that? What about the technology that sits behind that? And how do we ensure that those things are regulated? But it's not just about the products themselves, it's also about how they're supplied. And we've seen through this year a big acceleration. Particularly we saw it on face masks, where people with 3D printers discovered they could print face masks. But face masks still need to be safe. And it's not so much the fact you can produce one, it's whether you can produce one safely. And how do standards apply in that situation? How do we flex things for small producers? How do we ensure the same confidence for domestic supply? And what happens if people are producing their own products? Who is responsible for the safety of that product? And we've seen similar trends in health devices, health sectors, digital supply of some of those products. So new products supplied in new ways, but also new opportunities for regulators to work differently. And we had a conference in October, an international conference, and there we heard presentations from people around the world as to what they were doing. And I was particularly struck by one from Japanese regulators who were already talking about digital inspectors and how you could carry out inspections remotely, how you could gather data, how you could use that data. So I think big data really refers to the ability to use much more data, but digital inspectors also applies to the ability to analyse and think through that, gather information and interact. And if industry is moving towards more digital activity, how do regulators respond to that, and respond to that at the pace of that? And how do regulators start to improve the way they use that work to improve their outcomes? Big challenges, I think. And so I think we need to accelerate the laws that we have and the ways that we apply them. I think too often we regulate for the past and we struggle to catch up, and that applies to the world of standards just as much as it applies to the world of regulation, and it also applies to the way that we deliver that regulation. I think there's a challenge there we need to be accelerating, and particularly at the moment we need to take opportunities to look to the future. And we are going to be looking at the product safety framework to make sure that's fit for purpose. But what about the frameworks that you implement? Are they fit for purpose for the future? And do you need to think about how you can support that change? But also we need to be innovators, partly because we have big opportunities around things like big data, AI and algorithms, but also because if we're going to regulate innovators, we need to be innovators ourselves. We need to meet those that we regulate in the same terms. And any mention of algorithms immediately starts to introduce one of the other big themes for me of this year, which is about inclusivity and equity and fairness. And we've seen already some bad examples of algorithms that don't build that equity into their ways of working. How are we going to ensure that the mysterious black box that spits out the answer actually is consistent with what we as society want in terms of the way we treat people? And that, for me, has been a theme throughout a lot of what we've been thinking about this year as an office, and in our engagement and partnerships with other people. I suspect it has been where you work as well. The consequence of the whole of the drive to understand and implement the sense that Black Lives Matter, that we have to, in our inclusivity, sometimes recognise the disadvantage that people have suffered and seek to remedy that, I think has been a real challenge for us as a group of people that we've really been embracing through this year. And as we've changed the ways that we work internally, we've also started to challenge ourselves about the ways that we work externally. And how does our regulatory environment actually recognise diversity, encourage inclusivity? And so we want to be challengers in that space. We want to hear from people about what they think we could do, but also the ways that we challenge other people. So if we're going to be innovators, let's be innovators in ways that are inclusive and ways that recognise the value of the diversity that we have in our rich society. And I think that's certainly something we would, as OPSS, we'd like to take forward into our ways of working and our thinking in the future. And then the final area, next slide, is the area of recognising the UK's future global position. We've got other sessions on that over the next couple of days, so I'm not going to labour this point. But EU exit means that the UK is in a new place. And for most of us that aren't old enough to have remembered before we entered what was then called the Common Market, it's a uniquely new place where we have to provide our own regulatory capacity and assurance. And so talking to businesses about what they're looking for competent and nimble regulation, competent to ensure that we can do those things that now fall to the UK, that used to fall to the European Union, and we will have the ability to do that. That's a challenge for people like me running national regulators, but it's also for local authorities to ensure they're part of that single system. And we need to get our minds around what that change means. But we also need to be nimble. There is a place for Global Britain with a USP around innovation, research and development coming to the forefront of new markets. We've seen that in the vaccine announcements over the last. And regulators need to be able to do that thing of being both quick but also confident. And I'm sure you've read, as I have, the challenges for the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority in ensuring that the vaccine that's been produced in the UK through Oxford is not only available but also is assured. And so I think that ability to be both competent and nimble at the same time will be part of the future challenge. So there's 7 things that I'm saying that regulators need to be. I wonder if you agree with them. I wonder if you think I've missed something. Let me just remind you of them. Adaptable and agile and providing assurance. Able to accelerate to meet new challenges, but also innovators. Competent to deliver regulation, protect people, protect places, protect workers, but also nimble to be supportive of the UK and all that we're doing. I think my sound is a bit fuzzy, which probably means I have to stop talking. So lots of thoughts from me. I've got one more slide which I might come back to, but let me just open it up first of all to Catherine, see if she's got any questions, comments that people want to make, and we can go on to the final slide if we have time.
Thanks very much, Graham. So I'd encourage people that if you have got some questions to put them into the chat, please. Got a question there, Graham, about it being a fast-paced year of change. What do you think the single most important priority should be in the future for regulatory professions?
Well, I mean, in some ways, I think it is I think it is being intentional about how we redefine ourselves for the future. I think that we have seen And I've been doing a little bit of work recently on the policy response to the tragedy of Grenfell Tower and how we create a new regulatory environment that responds to that. And I think that again is an example of the sorts of challenges that are emerging. And I think for regulators, and I don't think it's any different whether you're local or national, your part might be different, but the overall challenge is the same. And that is to ensure that we are relevant to those challenges. We're on the front foot. We've got that nimbleness that I'm describing. But I think if I was to say one thing, it would be to be intentional and to take ownership. We can either allow things to happen to us, or we can seek to drive that future. And I think there's great opportunities at the moment, particularly with the profile that local regulators have had through COVID, to say that we have a vision for the future. We have an expectation of how we want to be, and we are on the front foot in driving that. So that would be my challenge, would be to step forward and to step into that space and to say that we have a vision for the regulator of the future, which hopefully I've given a few people a few pointers in how we're seeing that. But obviously it's for local regulators to make their own statements.
So just picking up on your point there, Graham, about it's sort of regulators' time. How do you think COVID has changed the relationship that central government has with local regulators?
That's a good question, and it might be a bit early to say. I mean, some of the strands that I've seen have been a greater recognition, certainly from national politicians, of the importance of a local response to actually put flesh on the bones of some of the challenges that we've seen. As I said, it's all very well to say these businesses must close, but who's actually going to achieve that? And it was local regulators that stepped up and said we could do that. Increasingly working with national regulators, particularly in that sense the HSE, but it was very much a local authority response that said we're part of the local solution. And through local resilience forums, connecting together public health into business closures, into safe opening. And I think ministers have genuinely had high regard for that. Of course, there's been some examples in the press of some what are described as more negative stories, and we will always have that. We'll have that in any situation. And you know, if you look at NHS, if you look at Public Health England, if you look at Health and Social Care Department, there's plenty of examples of that. But it's important that we focus on the positives, and we focus on the ways that local authorities have really stepped forward and done that. And I hope what OPSS have done, which I don't think is new, because I think it underpins Better Business for All and underpins primary authority, and it underpins the way we want to work as a product safety regulator with trading standards, is a genuine partnership in that. We don't think that all the answers are held in Whitehall or even in Birmingham, but we do think that together we can achieve better outcomes. And sometimes that's frustrating because people would like a simple answer to a very complex question. And sometimes it's actually, I think some of the mechanisms that we set up, particularly the primary authority panels, where people can get together, get around the table and thrash out the solutions, have been really, really helpful there. And sometimes it's just recognising that professional officers need to be able to work with local businesses to say this is the situation. No doubt it will become clearer, but at the moment this is how we can work together to go forward. And I think there's been some brilliant examples of that in those weeks.
Yeah, I've had a few complaints about my sound quality. I'm afraid there's nothing I can do to change it. That's how it is. As long as you can hear me. I'm sorry if I'm a bit muffled. I see Richard Strawson, you've got your hand up. Richard, would you like to make a comment on this question?
Yeah, thank you. Morning, Graham. It's Richard Strawson, head up East Sussex Trading Standards. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. I think you did touch upon it, though. It is a resource issue because obviously over the past 7-8 months, we've all to a certain extent been firefighting with this and with the resources we've got. And whilst short-term resource in terms of extra money has come from government, my thoughts are this needs to be more long-term investment in regulation, recognising the strengths that we do bring to world pandemics, and actually you touched upon it in EU exit as well. Now going forward, I'd love to be in a position to innovate, and I think I could be, but in innovation, we need to invest in our regulatory capacity over the long term. And like we hear announcements from government of 20,000 extra police officers, that's not an instantaneous thing. And I'd like to know from you, Graham, what discussions you've had going forward and what arguments perhaps you've put forward to say, actually, there needs to be a longer term investment in regulatory capacity to deal with the likes of EU exit and changed regulatory delivery models, as well as being able to be on the front foot should global pandemics come around again.
Thanks, Richard. I might just, if we could just, Khadija, put up the last slide. I think in some ways it talks to certainly what has been happening in terms of what OPSS has been doing in the areas that Richard's talking about, and we can have a little look at that. I also think that the future does need to respond to all the things that we've just been talking about, and of course the Chancellor will make an announcement tomorrow about the spending review outcomes for the next financial year, and you can be assured that in terms of the areas that we're responsible for, as other national bodies have, I'm sure, been doing, trying to ensure that we have sufficient resources for the sorts of challenges that Richard's outlining there. And obviously they're particularly prominent in EU exit around product safety and import and export issues. And I can't predict what the Chancellor will say, and I don't suppose he'll say very much about local regulation when he's talking about all of the nation's finances, but I think it is important that that is then followed up in our individual conversations nationally and locally about recognising the importance of local regulation in the way that we've been talking about this morning. But I also think that we need to work on our shared messages and our shared communication. I've emphasised innovation quite a lot this morning because I don't think we can always assume that the answer is more people and more money and more capacity. I think it has to be new ways of working. I think there are some really good examples of that. I think a small piece of well-targeted work can often have more impact than lots of people being involved if we do our thinking right and use our technology right. And there's some brilliant examples of that from around the country. So as you can see from the slide there, a lot of what we're doing, both within the better regulatory delivery area and also in the product regulation area, is really around providing the capacity and capability for local authorities to do the job they have, and providing resources, support, access to standards, training, but a lot increasingly around coordination in bringing people together, particularly in the primary authority panels, the expert panels, the strategic regulatory networks that Catherine will say more about later on in the week. And I think that would be my sort of overarching view. I don't think it's very likely that we will easily see significant large sums of money becoming available in the next period. I think there's going to be some challenging times in the periods ahead. I think the question is how we use the resources we have, how we use the greater profile that regulatory services have locally and nationally, and play back to politicians locally and nationally. When the chips were down, when you wanted somebody to do a job at a local level, you looked to environmental health, you looked to trading standards, you looked to fire officers, you looked to licensing officers. If that's what you expect of them, how are you going to ensure that they are there in the quantity and the capacity and the connectedness that you need to do the job you're looking for in the future? And I think that is a genuine narrative that we need to be establishing. It's certainly one that we talk about with our ministers, and I know other parts of government do as well. But I think it's also one that we need to talk about locally. It's a very small part of the national cake that is spent by local regulators, but I think in this COVID crisis we've seen the value of that, and I think it was mentioned yesterday by the Prime Minister in his press notice. So it's probably a good place to finish and bring it round back to you, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Graham, and thank you for your question, Richard. Some food for thought there. Thank you, Graham. Just like to now end the session as I intended to start it with a message for the Minister, but I think it follows on nicely from what Graham was saying there. I'll sign off the session and then play the video. So thank you all for attending this morning. Appreciate your time when I know you're very, very busy. As I said, there's a number of other sessions in the week. Please do sign up for them if you've got time. The next session today is at 11:15, and that's with Rob Weaver from Tewkesbury Council, talking about leading his service through the COVID pandemic. So, Khadija, if we could just have the video, please, and some words from Paul Scully.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be able to have the opportunity to say a few words to you today. My ministerial responsibilities include small businesses, consumers and regulation, and I welcome the opportunity to recognise the hard work of local regulators this afternoon. The sudden and far-reaching impact of COVID-19 pandemic has in some way affected everyone. Our daily routines, our ways of working, our travel plans, and even our personal and professional priorities. But this has also been a timely reminder that although the world may be a very different place, the role of the regulator and the way in which that regulation is delivered is as important, if not more important, as ever. So I wanted to take this opportunity to recognise your hard work as local regulators, dealing with changing legislation and guidance and responding to this on the front line, advising businesses and undertaking proportionate enforcement where needed to help keep everyone safe. In particular, the skills and the expertise of those working in local authorities has been vital during this emergency period, and government values the continued professionalism and dedication of officers who have risen to a significant challenge in conjunction with colleagues in government. I'm confident that together we can meet the regulatory challenges presented by our ever-changing world. Thank you, and I do hope that you enjoy the rest of this virtual event.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.